Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Impact at Scale podcast with Zal Dastur. My guest today is Luke Henning, the Chief Business Officer and co-founder of Circ. Circ is an Earthshot Prize finalist, as well as a Time World Green Tech Top 25 company. And it is also tackling one of the biggest issues that we face right now on the planet, which is textile waste. So Circ is building the infrastructure needed for industrial scale textile recycling. And what we're going to do in this episode is we're going to look at what it really takes to turn breakthrough science into a lasting impact. So, Luke, hi, welcome to the show.
Hi, Zal. Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate you having me on.
And it's great to see you. For those that don't know, I also met Luke as part of the Temasek Trust Amplifier program, where they were brought here to Singapore to see how they can work with the region. So, it's great to be connected with you, Luke. I gave a very brief introduction to Circ, but I'm sure that you can provide a little bit more detail for our listeners about the exciting work that you're doing.
Perfect. So at Circ, we're on a mission to protect the planet from the cost of clothing. And that's a bold statement, especially since most people don't understand that there is a cost to clothing. We don't realize what our clothes are made of, but they're largely made of oil, cotton, and trees are the three biggest things we make our clothes from. And so what we at Circ do is we developed a technology to take the biggest waste stream there, polycotton blends, and take those and recycle them and recover both the polyester portion and take that back to polyester so it can be reused as textiles, and take the cotton portion and use that cellulose instead of using trees to make viscose and lyocell, so to make the man-made cellulosics. So we can take those materials, recover them, and return them back to the textile supply chain. So your old clothes, textile scraps, can go back into making new clothes.
I was having coffee yesterday with a friend of mine that works for a large oil and gas company. And, he looked me up and down and he said, you do realize absolutely everything that you're wearing has plastic in it, down to your underwear, your jeans, obviously my shoes, my watch. He's like, your shirt, your clothes, it all has some kind of plastic in it. So I think we probably really don't understand how much plastic has impacted and sort of come into the fashion brands and into clothing. I'm curious as to what inspired you to take on this challenge, because it is quite a big one.
So we actually started in a different industry entirely. We were doing a novel crop for biochemicals. So we were recovering chemicals from plants. The technology we built foolishly was a great solution, but not one that the market really wanted. People are very happy using corn for their sugar for chemicals and soy for their oil for chemicals. So we were looking around what to do because we developed this plant, we developed all of the science, we developed an extraction technology to get the chemicals out of the plants, but we didn't have a market. We started searching around and someone actually asked us if our technology could be used for processing textiles. It turns out that we got very positive results really quickly. We assumed people must already be doing this. We also assumed that it must, not really be that big a deal because we hadn't really heard of it. However, we sometimes say it's better than having the solution is having the solution at the right time. Turns out there were a whole lot of people becoming very aware of the massive impact that textiles and fashion have on the planet. It's one of the most polluting industries in the world. It's one of the oldest industries in the world, if you think about it. And so we just happened to hit the market at the right time. And we converted the company across from an ag tech company doing clean chemicals and clean fuels from plants into a textile recycling company. I think the biggest aha moment for us there was when Patagonia cold called us, and our phone started ringing, that we knew, we were onto something.
You just literally took my next question away, which was, how did you know that, or what was the moment, the breakthrough moment that made you realize this could truly scale? But as soon as you start having global companies call you inbound and say, hey, we want to be working with you and we want to do, we want to be partners, you were like, oh, okay, I think we're onto something here. So that must have been a lot of relief, because I imagine, I'm a founder myself, and I know that it must have been very hard for you to develop all this tech in an area that you thought was crucial and helpful and would be providing value, and then seeing that the market didn't want this.
Especially since I came at this from an energy dependency point of view. I'm South African. I joined and got involved in this originally because of the fact that I wanted to take a technology like this back to Africa, back to South Africa, and basically grow it there, where you have a lot of agriculture, but a huge energy dependency on imported sources. That being said, I think our focus was always just finding a big challenge to solve, something that could scale and have a significant impact and actually deliver on our view that we need to build a better world, that we have to work to build a better world. So I think that transition was easier, I would say. I'd say when Patagonia called and when we started getting that interest, we knew we had product market fit. But with hard tech, it's very different than soft tech, because it's a lot more difficult to then go and produce your solution. So to your question about when did we know we could scale, I think that came more from the elegance of our solution. So it wasn't crazily complicated. There were no crazy novel chemicals that we needed for the process, no insane equipment. And then when we were able to largely develop our solution using commercially available equipment that was used in other industries, just using it in novel ways, that was for me the aha moment. This can scale.
So, that's something I notice a lot with clients that I work with, accelerators and VCs, is one of the big challenges that they face, especially in climate tech, is the hurdle of moving from science to something that becomes industrially ready. So what was the sort of biggest challenge that you saw or that you faced in that process of going, hey, we have something that works on a bench, that works in a lab, and then how do we take that to a factory, let's say?
That really is often the rub with hard tech. So for us, we were both a victim and beneficiary of COVID in a way. And that was, we had lined up what we thought was the route to scale this technology, and then COVID hit, and we literally couldn't bring the equipment providers and the engineers that we were planning to use to the US. We had identified a potential facility that we could use to test our technology at a more demo scale. Even the one we found in Canada, we couldn't get there. So we ended up scrambling and looking around and revisiting some of our earlier conversations that we had deemed potentially not relevant. And we ended up finding some commercially available equipment that was being used in a pilot facility that were essentially for hire, that Andritz had, that they were using for a different application. And so we were able to very quickly scale up our process, go from batch to continuous, and find equipment that was, pretty readily available in the market. That was very much on the cellulose side, so on the cotton side. On the polyester side, much more challenging. Because when you think about polyester, and to your point about plastic being in all of your clothes, people don't realize how much plastic. The large polyester producers in the world do millions of tons of polyester fiber a year. Millions. I went and saw a company recently in China, very large producer. They do, I think, close on 10 million tons a year polyester production. Just one company. So, your friend's point about, oh, look, it's in everything you're wearing. It's not just in everything you're wearing. It's in what you're sitting on, what you're sleeping on, what you're walking on, what you're sitting on in your car, the paneling of your car, everything. It's a monstrous amount. Scaling from there to being able to test your materials in a commercial setting is a big ask. So hitting minimum order quantities, much bigger challenge on the polyester side. Polyester's been around now for almost 100 years. A lot of that experimental pilot equipment doesn't exist anymore. So I think a mad scramble for us was finding partners who had that equipment and who were willing to work with innovators so that we could scale up our product. Because it's great if I hand a brand little vials of white powder and little, bags of fluff. That means nothing to a textile brand. I've got to take it all the way through to garments and show that I can delight their customer's customer.
So tell me about the process here, actually, because I also don't really know. I know, that we produce, I think it's enough clothes in 1 year to clothe 6 generations of people. We are buying much more. The per use, like, use of an item is going down. So, especially when it's weirder because the high ticket items tend to be used less because they're used for more special occasions. And so you don't want to be seen in the same dress at 2 weddings or whatever it is. Tell me about, not the problem, because I believe that it's there. Tell me about the process. How do you find the clothes? How do you get the clothes? How does that all work? What does one do with the clothes? Do they go in, like, when, like a consumer like me, when I donate, maybe I give to Salvation Army or I give somewhere else, but I'm sure that at some point that kind of all ends up in landfill somewhere.
So, what happens with your clothes now? Honestly, a lot of people just throw them in the bin. They just toss them away. And then it's mixed with your other municipal solid waste, and then it's just going to landfill or maybe incineration, right? If there's a huge incinerator that can take mixed waste. If you've donated your clothes, then what happens is it gets sorted and you get several things happen. One is what's called a tropical sort in most places, because often those clothes end up going to places like that are equatorial. And I don't need to tell you, based in Singapore, that those places are not cold. You do not need your snow jackets.
Fair enough. Fair enough. You don't need the sweaters and the snow jackets here in Southeast Asia.
So then what happens is that those get taken out and those get discarded. Then the other stuff gets packaged up in bales and it gets shipped overseas often and goes to these markets and then gets sorted and sold. And what doesn't gets shredded up and made into all sorts of things. But there's so much volume and less of it is resellable. Less of it is useful. And so you just end up with these mountains of waste, which is how you end up with what was a garbage pile of clothing in the Atacama Desert in Chile, which could be seen from space, apparently.
Yeah, I was about to say that. I heard about it a few months ago that seems to be the global, like we have the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. There seems to be something for clothes in the Atacama Desert where they're just a huge pile of them. And it's, I mean, my big thing on this planet, and somebody asked me this question the other day, which was like, what would you do if you could go out and solve something? What would you do? And for me, it's waste, because if you look at energy, water, food, clothing, all of us are using, or most people use more than they need, and they do so mindlessly. They waste energy, they waste food, they waste water because they're not thinking about it. And I think it's probably the same with clothes, right? Like the number of times people will buy clothes that they don't need, right? But just because, it probably has that dopamine hit, I imagine.
Well, it's also a function of what they call hidden systems. People don't even think about these things. As you say, we've been trained to consume, not to consider what the actual cost of something is. So, you flush your toilet, the waste goes away. You don't have to think about it. You take your shower, you turn on the water, it's hot. Think about the luxury of having on demand, sterilized, clean water.
I think it was Jimmy Carr who said something about how um, hot water, I think it only started in the 1950s, maybe. So literally the vast majority of people that have ever lived on this planet have never had the chance to experience hot water. Even, it didn't matter whether you were a king or an emperor or whatever 100 years ago, you still took cold showers. And the fact that you're able to turn this on, and in Singapore, the miracle of the water here is that you can drink it, which you can't even say that about most places in the US these days, so like the fact that you've got clean drinking water coming out of your tap is really like a 0.1% benefit of humanity, and people don't think about that at all.
And it's the same water going into your toilet. Just to make it like that's how wasteful we are. It's just something to think about. So, I mean, people go in and they're all these clothes, so they just pick what they want and they wear it and then they dispose of it. You don't think about what it takes to actually make a garment, right? Think about the materials that had to go in, how long the life cycle is of a single garment. And clothing is one of the most wasteful industries. It's probably the most wasteful industry next to food. But the difference is food is consumable and is perishable. We are treating way too many things that should be durable goods as perishable, as disposable. We have
I mean, I
fundamentally
think
over
I've
the
said
last
this on
50
this show
years
before.
changed our
You're so right.
relationship with all things that we consume. We've become exactly that, consumers. And so, I mean, it is no surprise that we produce as many clothes as we do, because you walk into a store, you expect to find the garment that you want in the color that you want in your size. You don't think about the luxury of what that is. Previously, if you wanted clothes that fit you, they had to be tailored.
I mean, I think what you're saying probably is true for almost everything these days. There was a great ad that showed you the life cycle of a plastic spoon, and it was like the oil had to be dug out of the ground, it had to be processed, it had to be transported, it had to be sent to a factory, it had to be converted into plastic, it had to be manufactured into a spoon, it had to be distributed to the supermarket. You had to go to the supermarket. You had to buy that spoon. You then use, and the tagline was that, all of this because you can't be bothered washing your spoon, you know? And it's like nobody realizes everything has come so easy. Nobody realizes the impact, and it's almost like the externalities have all been exported, so we don't care. It's like how, you know, they the Western world, they say, is the reason why their emissions are lower is because they just exported their emissions to the developing world, right? We don't want to manufacture here. We're going to move all our factories to China, Bangladesh, and Vietnam. You can do all of that. We just want to buy the product, right? So it's so funny that it's the same thing. You don't have an idea of what's happening. You just kind of put it out of your mind. You don't think about it. And then it becomes the standard, which is what I fear is happening right now. Like, I talk about, like, Deliveroo or Grab or Uber Eats, wherever you are, whatever food delivery tool you use. When I was growing up, I remember that the only options to get food delivered was either pizza or McDonald's. Those were the only two things that really delivered at any time. And now you can get food from anywhere in the world delivered to your door. But if it's here in more than an hour, oh my God, like, don't make me wait. Like, that's so ridiculous, right? Like, our baseline changes so quickly. 20 years ago, 15 years ago, if somebody told you this, that, hey, from your phone, you'll get food from anywhere over the world delivered to you in an hour, you would think it's like magic. And now it's like, if it's an hour and 5 minutes, it's not good enough. And that seems to be happening with every industry. We're just getting used to the convenience, and convenience costs. We just don't see that cost.
It's so true. There's this whole move to bring all of this manufacturing back to the US. And I don't think they've necessarily considered that a lot of this manufacturing, the US doesn't want back because of the pollution it comes with. So, dyeing, for example, go and find large scale dyeing for me of textiles in any major Western country. I'd be very surprised, because there are companies who awesomely are working on clean dyeing and cleaning up the dyeing solutions. But I mean, crazy statistic about the amount of the world's chemicals that get used in making clothes. When you start seeing all the chemicals that are used on your clothes, it starts to become very, very scary very fast. Sorry, man.
This is, I asked this question about food. I asked it about food, which was like, when did the people that made our food stop caring about what the food does to us? And it's almost the same with fashion, right? Like, I read about Shein and how they find lead and all kinds of harmful chemicals that are in the clothing that above, like, hugely above levels
Or
that anybody is, and it's like it is very clear in this case the people that are making these clothes, but in some case you just have to look at some of the stuff they put in food, right? And you're like, these people don't care what's happening to us. I read somewhere that the nutritional value of an apple has dropped by more than 50% over the last 30. So if you want to have the same nutritional content in, like, you'd have to have like 4 apples to get the same as one gave you however
yeah,
many
I
years
was
ago,
going to say
because
50% seems too low. Too low. I
yeah,
should have got way more.
yeah, and it's only because we've then optimized for color and taste rather than sort of nutrition.
Or even not even taste. It's a visual game for food. But
Mm.
here's the thing: when you don't know what's in your clothes, you just want it to look. It's how you present yourself and brand yourself to the world. So you wanted to speak. It's a big value signaling thing for you. So you want to show your values with it, and it must be comfortable. You want a certain level of comfort. You want to enjoy the hand feel of it. Part of the reason that Shein got into a lot of trouble was because of the chemical they used to make polyester so soft, right? That was the major chemical of concern. But it's because you're taking plastic, the same plastic that's in your water bottles, and wanting to make it feel super silky and luxurious. So you put all sorts of relaxers on it to make it do that. And it turns out those are really unhealthy for you. But and I'm sure you didn't think I'd be on here defending Shein, but to be fair with Shein, is I think they just scaled so fast that they're having to catch up with their supply chain. I think there's a lot of stuff that happens in their supply chain that is in some ways teething issues because I think they're still learning to put in place all of the controls that other brands have had to learn to put into place because they've already had.
Well, I heard that Shein's not a brand. I heard that Shein's not a brand. I heard that what Shein is an incredibly sophisticated AI engine that is able to connect to all of the manufacturers in China. And so it really just becomes like, if you think about it, it's like the eBay of clothes, where people and these brands are uploading their clothes at this, obviously without the brand logos or whatever. And that's why they get to sell them for this super cheap price. But actually, it's a technology software company much more than it is some kind of a fashion brand, because it's not actually producing anything. It's just very well connected to all the different factories that are producing in China.
Most brands don't produce anything. They don't
I mean,
own their
was it about the fancy
they don't own
Italian
their
and
supply.
European brands that were getting stuff made in China and then assembled in Italy so that it could be said like made in Italy or made in France?
Or when they were making it in Italy, they just had the Chinese company produce a Chinese factory in Italy so that they could do it. And so, yes, one of the brands just got caught doing exactly that. And so, look, a lot of brands don't control their supply chain. They don't know what goes on in their supply chain. Some of it feels a bit willful ignorance in some ways. So, I mean, I think there's a lot of fingers pointed at Shein. I think what is problematic is they drive the consumer and consumption model in that algorithmically they are encouraging people to consume. Right? They're in the business of selling more clothes, and so they encourage people to consume and to push clothes to such a price point, right, that clothes can become a throwaway. Someone was joking that it's cheaper if you buy your underwear from Shein to just buy new underwear than to wash it.
Yeah,
You can't
that's a
wash
problem.
the underwear you get from them for the price they will ship it to you at.
I mean, I read that 30% of all packages that were coming to the US were either Shein or Temu. And then, how many billions of packages go to the US every year, and 30% are from these brands? Like, it's incredible.
In 1 year, they added 600 million additional packages to the post office.
I mean, let's talk about what's going on with you guys in France, because I hear, I was reading you're opening a huge factory over there. You're going to be processing. What is the goal? What's the idea? What is there a reason you did it in France?
So actually, this is a very good and natural segue actually to France, because France is looking at how they put substantial penalties on companies in terms of the environmental footprint of their clothes. So your clothes will actually get a rating, and depending on the rating and the score you get, depends on the tax you will have to pay on those clothes. Up to €5 per garment, I think is.
I mean, that's incredible. I did not know that. I wish every country could do this for every product, because I think you would all of a sudden start seeing massive shifts and changes in how consumers purchase.
So France is also the first country to have an EPR scheme for textiles. They've had one since, I think, 2012. They also have they have regulatory and policy support. They have been incredibly welcoming. They want to be the circularity capital of Europe, and they're one of the largest economies in Europe. And so they were very, very supportive, and that's one of the main reasons we went there. The other reasons are things like there's a skilled chemical workforce there, because we do chemically recycle this. There is also, they have the land, they have the industrial history, they also have base load energy, right? Because problem with a lot of places is all recycling takes some measure of energy, because you used energy to put the chemicals together, you need energy to break them apart. You don't want to be then burning coal to recycle oil. It starts to very strongly erode the environmental savings of what you're doing. So France having good baseload energy, very, very powerful as well. Rich textile history as well. And, excellent logistics, because you're going to have those materials flow in and out of France. And I know people are, one of the things that people talk about with clothing is like how far it travels, but actually clothes pack up really tight. And if you're shipping them in containers, like ocean freight is far less damaging than flying things around or driving them around or even railing them around. So I would say France.
Where's the feedstock going to come from for this?
So the feedstock is a combination. Most people don't realize that post-consumer is a huge source of waste. That when you produce garments, there's a lot of yarn waste that gets produced. And then, of course, at your cutting room floor, you cut those patterns out, and that generates a large amount of waste. So in the beginning, a lot of the recyclers, ourselves included, are looking at using a large amount of that post-industrial scrap. And so that would be sourced from all the nearshoring production sites for Europe. There is also a huge volume of post-consumer textiles that are coming out of Europe. And so we've been talking to post-consumer collectors and sorters. Part of the issue is just in terms of getting good quality post-consumer that's well sorted, and that technology is developing and coming along. But the ultimate aim for Europe is for it to be a post-consumer solution, because that's the majority of the waste that they deal with. If you're talking about building these facilities, and it's very much our intention to roll these out globally, as you go into the big production hubs like China, India, Bangladesh, Vietnam, all of those, Indonesia, you have a lot more post-industrial that has to be dealt with anyway. And people will tell you, of course, we're using it. And then you find out what they mean by using it is burning it for energy.
Yeah, I mean, I know a company. One of my clients was an Australian company that actually is they're trying to develop AI like vision and arm pickers to be able to, as you said, to be able to sort by post-consumer clothing waste, but specifically by product. So what is this polyester? Is this yarn? Is this cotton? Is this? And from what I understand, that's part of the challenge is dividing all of that up. And so if you had a machine that was able to do it and could just be picking using the Vision AI, they'd be able to pick things off and invest in it and then sort it.
So
I understand that makes the recycling process much easier.
So they use a combination of AI and they tend to use near field infrared so that then they can detect the material composition. So there is technology developing and it's getting much more accurate because those systems are learning all the time.
Now, I know you mentioned Patagonia as a brand, but obviously Patagonia has a brand reputation around clothing and the planet. Are other brands approaching you? Are they excited? Are they interesting? What would you say to clothing brands out there if they were listening, and how do you bring them to the table?
So we have investors who are other fashion brands, including Inditex, so the parent company of Zara, Bershka, Pull&Bear, as well as Zalando. We're the largest online clothing retailer in Europe. I don't know if that's still true with Shein and Temu out there. So they have both been very strong supporters of ours. In terms of talking about what brands could do to be helpful, I think most brands, this gets put in the sustainability bucket. And the sustainability bucket is often a separate compliance division off to the side of the main company. It isn't seen as core to the business model, unlike somewhere like Patagonia. And so what ultimately is needed by the innovators to scale is they need the support of the brands to show the market commitments. So with long-term purchase agreements that support the financing of these factories. They aren't asking the brands to finance these factories. They're asking them to provide the long-term purchase agreements that would support this. We just saw a really impressive 10-year contract come from Lululemon for Samsara Eco. And so that's for nylon and polynylon recycling. So that's really positive because a 10-year contract means that you can raise a lot more money to actually build the factories if you have that. But that kind of contract only happens if the brands don't see sustainability just as a tiny compliance function and actually understand that this is going to be a resource scarcity challenge because you're going to need the recycled materials. And in the beginning, there are not going to be enough of them available. And so you can protect your supply so that you can not face penalties and instead win market share by being the hero, not the villain in the story, right? But equally, it's a good risk mitigation thing. But that needs someone who has oversight of the whole company, who understands the P&L of the whole company. So you need buy-in from the senior people. You need the CFO to understand why you should be doing this. You need the CEO to understand why you're doing this. And if they aren't aligned and don't see this as a need, it's not going to be a priority for the companies.
And how do you find the best way to go about convincing and persuading senior stakeholders and senior management is?
It's been a lot of education, and I think the market has matured quite a bit. You've got to try and find the champions effectively. And you've got to have people who are passionate about this and will help you. One is just getting to actually have the conversation. Because frequently, those C-suite people do not understand or see the strategic benefit of this material supply. And so if they're not getting communicated to, if this isn't something that they really understand and understand why it's a concern for them, because as much as I need those purchase agreements, these are zero cost options. Every other industry, if you wanted to reserve capacity like this, you'd be paying to reserve capacity. The dynamics are different in this industry. They can take a free option effectively to secure this capacity. But you need someone who has the understanding and vision to understand why that makes sense.
Luke, I've got one last question for you. Is there anything that I didn't ask you about that I should have?
That is an excellent question. I think let me throw it back slightly differently in that let me give you something that surprises most people about This one is people think that because we recycle, that's all we think about. But we're trying to solve this problem. And I actually only want to take your clothes and recycle them when they're no longer of use. So please, if I can put out one impassioned plea to people, right? Keep your clothes and alive as long as possible. Treat your things as durable. I don't want to see your clothes in a month after you bought them, in days after you bought them, in a year after you bought them. If you have the right clothes, I want to see them in 10 years, not in one. So that would, in a way, be something that I would raise. Like, wash your clothes more carefully. Like, repair them when they need to be repaired. Look after them. We need to reconnect with the joy and passion we had for our clothes. Come on, tell
I
me
mean,
you don't have something in your wardrobe where you're like, I remember when I bought this, or I have such good memories of wearing this.
well, it's funny. I have clothes. I don't have clothes that I have a memory of wearing it, but I have clothes of, yeah, as you said, where I bought them. And so they're ones that I have, I bought clothes in Europe 10. Yeah. So that was, you're talking like 25, 26 years ago that still fit. I particularly have and it's very horrible and faded, but it was the gym shirt that I went for my run in this morning, which is, it's like an Australian, I think they held the Asian football championships there, and it's like. But the only reason I'm saying this is because it's got a 2007. It's like it's got the date on the T-shirt, and when I look at it, I'm like, oh, okay, that's lasted a long time. I don't like buying clothes, so as a result, I tend to keep the ones that I do have for a very long time. But you're absolutely right. I think I think not only with clothes but with everything in this world, right? We need to move away from this single-use disposable idea. I mean, I complain about it all the time in Singapore. You throw your trash into a garbage chute, never to be seen from again. You never have to worry about what happens to it. That garbage gets picked up 7 times a week, or 7 days a week, I should say. And so you don't care about your waste. And I think once if you started seeing that, I mean, Singapore, I read recently, was the highest per capita consumer of single-use plastic in the world. You know, and when you're comparing that to China, when you're comparing that in India, less so because they've banned it, but other countries, Vietnam, Philippines, it's shocking. It is
United
absolutely
States.
shocking. Yeah, the United States, absolutely. But Luke, this was a great conversation. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on.